بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Welcome to our third lecture in the series on Usul al-Tafsir. And the theme of today's lecture will be the uniqueness of the Qur'an. When I was just a boy, we first moved to America. I was 8 years old. They had this magazine called Parade, and in those days they used to have a joke page. And there was a joke that I still remember from more than 40 years ago, where this captain of an airplane, he came on the intercom after the plane had been up for a while, and he said, "Ladies and gentlemen, I have some good news and some bad news. The good news is that we have a tailwind behind us, and we're making really good time. And the bad news is that we're lost." And that stuck with me, and for me, it's a kind of a metaphor for the way the world is going now, and particularly under the dominance of Western civilization and their worldview, which is that it's based on the idea that the only things that are real are the things that you can perceive through your senses. And any questions about why am I here? What's the purpose of life? Is there anything after death? These kind of questions are outside of the purview of science. And if a person lives their whole life without dealing with these kind of questions, it makes for a great deal of unease. And so the nature of science is that it answers questions about how things work and the relationships between things that you can see and touch or find out about through some other sensory means. And science, by its nature, can't really deal with questions of why. And so traditionally, the type of knowledge, quote unquote, that deals with those questions is religion. Now, a religion then sort of provides a map for people in their lives. And it's important when you're using a map to have a map that's accurate. You know, before the Soviet Union collapsed, when communists were ruling the Soviet Union, they were very concerned about an American invasion in particular. And so every map they printed was inaccurate. So, you know, you're driving from city A to city B, and it looks like there's a road that goes all the way through. And all of a sudden, when you're looking at the map, and then you're driving, and the road that you think is going all the way through, it suddenly ends in the middle of nowhere. So that was their technique to try to slow down any possible invaders. Well, if you're using a map like that to navigate, of course, you're going to have major problems reaching your destination. So when we look at religions and their roadmaps for reality, there has to be some criteria for judging the accuracy of these maps. And the map really is the scripture. Every religion's map is its scripture. And so we have to take a look at what is it that makes these various scriptures more or less viable or accurate. So some of the questions to be asked is, how accurately has this scripture been preserved? So, for instance, the Buddhist scriptures, they're quite old. I mean, they're about 2,500 years old, something like that. And there's huge amount of question about how accurate they are, and then even then what they have is it's a kind of a jumble of stuff, the Tripitaka. With Christianity and Judaism, the accuracy of the preservation of the Old and New Testaments is very open to question. And like that with other scriptures, you have some major problems when you compare it to the Qur'an. And then the second major issue is it free of internal contradictions? And then, is it free of contradictions between what it says about reality and what we know to be true? So when it made statements about the past, were they accurate or mistaken? Were there mistakes in it? When it makes declarations about the world around us, in other words, scientific realities, is it accurate or mistaken? And when it predicted the future, was it accurate or inaccurate in that? And then also, are its teachings about God clear or confused? Or, for Buddhism, of course, God isn't even part of the picture. So, teachings about the nature of reality. Does it give us a clear understanding of the purpose of life? Do its laws promote human well-being? Are its laws realistic? Is it asking people to do things that are within the boundaries of normal human nature, or is it asking them to go against the grain of human nature? So, for instance, Buddhism and Catholicism, they consider the highest state of human existence to be celibacy. And of course that creates major problems. If you shift the gaze a little bit then to the founder of the religion, what kind of person was he or her, or he or she? How much did that person live by their own teachings? What kind of model did they present for their followers? So these are some key questions to be asked about any religion, and particularly about its scripture. Now, one of my teachers, Shaykh Mahmood, al-Zayn, he wrote a pretty small book, but very valuable, on the miraculous nature of the Qur'an. And now this has been a theme that Muslim scholars have dealt with down through the ages. And one of the main focuses on the miraculous nature of the Qur'an has been its linguistic inimitability. And some of that's pretty ethereal stuff. You have to be really up on the Arabic language to appreciate the intricacies of the way it expresses. And that sort of led, a lot of common Muslims to this concept or the idea that, well, the miraculous nature of the Qur'an is just something that's only a real specialist can appreciate. And so what Dr. Zayn suggested is that, there are certain aspects which are accessible only to highly trained specialists, but there are other aspects of it which are open to the average person. And the main miraculous aspect that he identified was that it's free of contradiction. And that's, the criteria that was identified in the Qur'an in Surah An-Nisa. بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم, Allah said, أفلا يتدبرون القرآن ولو كان من عند غير الله لوجدوا فيه اختلافا كثيرا. Will they not then ponder on the Qur'an? If it had been from other than Allah, they would have found in it much inconsistency. So, internal inconsistency or inconsistency with regard to external reality, what we know to be true, and also inconsistency when it comes to grammar or violation of the way the language should be used. Now, Dr. Zayn, he goes on to talk about, he says, if a book is found to be free of error, then that's a sign of its divine origin, because any human effort is chock full of errors. And but when we talk about errors, they have to be clear errors that everybody can agree upon. This is an error. If it's a disputed matter, then that's not the kind of issues that would disprove the Quranic claim. And then Dr. Zayn gives a really interesting example or an analogy by which we can understand just how special the Qur'an is. If you took some branch of science, let's say ophthalmology, the study of the eye, and you brought, you just had unlimited funds, and you brought all the world's experts together, and they wrote a book on the eye. And, what's the likelihood that there would be some error in it? Well, it would probably be fairly small, because you have all these people who know all this amount about the eye. It's conceivable there would still be some error. But let's say you take that book and it's published now, and then after 10 years, come back and look at it. Okay, what we knew then may be a little bit different from what we know now. So would there be some errors? Maybe. The possibility goes up. Let's say 100 years passes. Some errors? Possibility is starting to look pretty good. Now, 1,000 years pass from the time of this book being written, and all these accumulated discoveries. Will there be errors? Almost certainly. Okay, now let's say that your funds are really massive. So you're not just going to be talking about the eye. You're going to gather all the world's experts on everything under the sun. Human biology, animal biology, astronomy, meteorology, embryology, geology, any kind of knowledge you can think of. Okay, you bring all the world's experts together and they write a book about all of these things. So now, when the scope of your discourse becomes wider, then of course the possibility of error becomes greater. Now let's say that you don't have that much money, so you hire one expert, and he's supposed to know something about all of these fields. So how likely is it that one expert now will make an error when he's talking about all of these wide areas? Of course, the likelihood is much greater than if it was a whole committee of experts. okay, now let's say your funding is really down, so you know you can't hire some professor from a university. You hire a college graduate. So, how likelihood that this guy with a bachelor's degree will be able to do the job? And then, okay, you can't get somebody with a bachelor's degree, so you get somebody who graduated from elementary school. How much likelihood of error is there? And then, okay, you can't find anybody to hire who has any kind of book education, so you just take somebody out of the jungles of Borneo, let's say, and you ask him to tell you about the nature of life. Okay, obviously, the amount of error that person's discourse will contain is just more than any accuracy that will be in it. So, the Arabs at the time of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, they were culturally probably more primitive than people living in Borneo are today. And so you have a person who couldn't read or write, and he came from this culture where almost nobody could read and write, and they were just in the middle of nowhere, so to speak. I mean, they were on the fringes of the civilized world, and they really didn't have any science. They didn't have hardly any kind of knowledge to speak of. And here you have somebody who, on his lips, through him, you have this book that's been studied by some of the best minds in history. They devoted their whole lives to studying this book, and it's just got all this amazing information in it.